next slide said, that's an air traffic controller. What about this picture?
No, what's your name?
This is sometimes thought of as an aircraft dispatcher, but again, that is not one. That is one of our floats working below wing or on the ramp. What about this picture?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one. So this is our friend Allison. She is a dispatcher for Southwest. And just to kind of point you to what her screens are looking at there, she has her flight planning system here on the left screen. In the middle is her moving map where she follows her flights. Up to the right here, on the top screen, is going to be some meteorology stuff. And then on the bottom here is the internet where she looks to be looking at some FAA route stuff. And then her phone system is off to her right. So let's talk about what a dispatcher is and what it is that we do. FAR 121-533 outlines one of our favorite phrases in this industry, operational control. And letter B talks about the pilot in command, who is also known as the captain and the aircraft dispatcher, are jointly responsible for the pre-flight planning, delay, and dispatch release of the flight in compliance with this chapter and operation specifications. Letter C tells us what the dispatcher is responsible for: monitoring the progress of each flight, issuing necessary information for the safety of flight, and canceling or redispatching the flight if, in their opinion or the opinion of the captain, the flight can't be completed as initially dispatched. I point your attention to number 2, that phrase safety of flight, something I'm going to reference a couple times throughout this presentation. Aircraft dispatchers are certificated airmen. It looks just like any other certificate you would get. Just instead of it saying private pilot or commercial pilot or airline transport pilot, ours would just say aircraft dispatcher in that section there. So what is the dispatcher's day like? You scan into your operations center, you maybe fill up your water bottle, make a cup of coffee, tea, maybe have your energy drink on the way in, whatever works for you. You sign into your computer, and you get up all your applications, and you start to brief yourself on your current flights that are in front of you, that are assigned to you for your shift, and then also for the flights that you are about to take over. You're very likely going to be assigned some flights to take over from a dispatcher who's at the end of their shift. And so you'll go to them, you'll get a brief from that dispatcher on what's going on with their flights, and then you take operational control for those flights that they've planned and are either about to depart or already en route. Throughout your shift, you're going to be developing an efficient flight plan while considering hazardous weather like thunderstorms and turbulence, and that's another phrase I'm going to use a few times through this presentation. Hazardous weather, turbulence, thunderstorms, things of that sort. You're going to evaluate flights that have deferred items on there, or items that are known to be inoperative. Airplanes are able to operate with some known non-safety of flight components, like a light or a clock. Something like that can be inoperative on an airplane, so long as you can comply with what the MEL says. And we'll take a look at an MEL page here in just a few moments. And you're going to be monitoring the FAA website for any reroutes that may be listed, or any air traffic initiatives that may be coming down the pipe. That could be in the form of a ground stop, a ground delay program, or an airspace flow program. You'll be field planning in accordance with the FARs. You'll be updating your flight crews on any hazardous weather or changing conditions, or anything that you think will affect safety of flight. And you'll be providing assistance to the pilots as the first point of contact for any issues. It could be mechanical, it could be medical, it could be security. It could just be a policies and procedures question. And because you're that first point of contact, you're thought of as the pilot on the ground, or the flight crew's eyes and ears on the ground. And with that, the dispatcher often has a direct line to any resource to make sure we can get to a resolution to that problem. So if you have a mechanical problem, you have a direct line to your maintenance controller. If you have a security problem, you have a direct line to your corporate security person. If you have a medical problem, you have a direct line to whatever medical facility it is that your airline may use for those kinds of issues. Workload-wise, The FARs state that a dispatcher can only be scheduled for 10 hours a shift. Here in the United States, most of your airlines work either 8, 9, or 10 hours in their shift, just depends on the carrier itself. If you were working at a carrier that has both an international and domestic presence, you may deal with anywhere from 8 to 12 flights in the air at once that you would be responsible for. Throughout your shift, if you're working on the domestic side of the room, you may plan anywhere from 25 to 35 flights or so in a shift. If you're working international, you may plan anywhere from 8 to 20, maybe an upwards of 25, especially during the winter when everyone's trying to escape the winter from up north. And because most airlines fly 24/7, 365, that means someone has to be subject to the overnight shift. And so on overnights, when you come in, you take over flights from the afternoon shift, who will be at the end of their shift, and essentially you're putting the airline to bed. You have a little lull to the middle of the night, and then you flight plan the very early flights for the airline to start. You hand those off to the day shift. Day shift then resumes operational control for those, and then they work basically the first half of the airline schedule throughout the day. And then the afternoon shift comes in, and rinse and repeat. You take out over operational control, you follow the flights you're taking over, and then you do some flight planning of your own. So things that we're always evaluating, weather, both at your departure and your arrival airport, and any alternate airports. So maybe your flight requires a takeoff alternate. Maybe it requires a destination alternate. In some cases, you have to name an en route alternate, depending on the type of operation that you are planning. You're always going to be evaluating en route weather, again, turbulence, and thunderstorms, things of that sort. Weight and balance and aircraft performance kind of go hand in hand. You want to make sure that you're planning your flight within the limitations of the aircraft. So whether it's a structural weight, or if you are dealing with a performance limited flight that could have some issues. Think of some high and hot airports, and we'll come back to that later in the presentation, where we may have some issues with flight planning. And of course, NOTAMs, everyone's favorite, is making sure that you have an airport that is open and that has a suitable runway surface for you to operate on. That kind of goes hand in hand with field conditions. Not only do you want to make sure you have an open runway, you want to have a runway that's, again, suitable for you to use. It's not iced over or something to that effect. Maintenance items, again, the next slide we'll talk about deferred items. Geopolitical factors. If you are dispatching internationally, especially, fortunately there's a number of wars happening all around the world. Airlines are still operating to a lot of airports in those areas. And so you want to make sure that whatever that conflict is not affecting that airport, and that airport is still open and available for you to use. Air traffic control constraints, again, talking about reroutes or any type of air traffic initiative that may be coming. This is a picture of an MEL, or the minimum equipment list. This is what maintenance and the dispatcher uses to make sure that they can comply with whatever is inoperative. So here we're looking at a Boeing 777, and in this case, we're looking just at the top line here, and it's the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, also known as the TCAS. And so the TCAS is not required to be operative if you're flying within the lower 48 states. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to kind of talk about a Los Angeles to Boston flight. So if that's the flight that we're planning, then we could, as long as we can comply with letter A and letter B here, which we can, then you could operate from Los Angeles to Boston, again, just as an example, on this flight, on this aircraft, with the TCAS being inoperative. ATC considerations. This screenshot's from a few weeks ago, as there was some weather moving through the Midwest. We'll focus here on the top one, advisory 119 there. And the name of this advisory is called the West to Chicago O'Hare. And the FAA is kind of to tell you where the constrained area is. So there's weather somewhere in the Chicago Center, ZAU, and ZKC is the Kansas City Center. And it'll tell you what valid ETDs are. for this advisory. So if you have a flight that's departing from the West Coast during this time, you would be subject to this advisory. So let's take a look at it. So again, advisory 119, the West to O'Hare, the reason is weather, and it gives you the included traffic. Sometimes they name specific airports, sometimes they just give you air traffic centers that you may be departing from. Sometimes, like in this case, they give you both. They tell us that it's affecting all flights. Again, it gives us those estimated times of departure. And in this case, this was an earlier advisory that the FAA needed to extend. So that's what that remark is for, where it says replaces advisory 82. And you can see here, if you're coming out of Glacier Park, Missoula, basically anywhere in Montana, the FAA does not care how you get to this point, but this is how you have to get to Chicago O'Hare. Now, if you miss this advisory and you send a flight plan without following this, if this is an active reroute, no sooner than you send your flight plan, the FAA will send you a reroute message. They will make sure you're on this route one way or another. If you happen to miss that, when the pilots call for their clearance, then they will get this reroute, they'll end up getting a full route clearance, and then they'll contact you and say, hey, we've got a reroute, and make sure we have the fuel, or we might need to add some fuel there in our departure station to make sure that we can operate safely. Another ATC consideration here is the airport arrival demand chart. This was a few weeks ago. This was from JFK. And the way this works is every airport has an arrival demand depending on the conditions. So in this case, JFK, earlier in the day, let's say this first black line here before it dips there, let's just estimate that's 50 flights an hour. JFK says they can land, whatever the conditions were that day. But you'll notice here, a couple hours later, that demand, or that arrival capacity takes a little bit of a dive. Now they can only land about 42 flights or so an hour. Whatever the constraint may be. It could be weather, it could be staffing, it could be an equipment outage. It could be any number of things. But now, when you're looking at this as a dispatcher, and if you're arriving in these time frames, in this 23Z hour and this 1Z hour, and you see that the airport has more arrivals than they say they can handle, it should raise some awareness for you. How is the ATC going to be able to manage that overage? You would think you could ask and get a good answer. Typically you won't. You kind of just have to plan for however you think they might handle it. And sometimes it's in the form of airborne holding. Sometimes they may do what's called time-based flow management delays. But this is where you would want to plan accordingly. Maybe you add a little more fuel if you had a flight going into JFK during those time frames, just so you have a way to handle whatever ATC decides to throw at you. Moving on to some weather considerations. This chart has some forecast turbulence here. It may be a little difficult to see from your seats, but each caret symbol there is a color, and there's a 3-digit number next to it. So the colors are green for light turbulence, and I'm sorry, these are all signifying pilot reports, or PIREPs, is what all these are signifying. And so green will be light turbulence that's reported, yellow will be light to moderate, orange would be continuous moderate, and red would be severe. And the 3-digit number next to the pilot report is the altitude at which that turbulence is being reported at. And so you can get a good general idea of where some of the turbulence is. A point to down near the Savannah area, you kind of have one report here, which is a circle with a line through it. That indicates a smooth report. Here is the Aviation Weather Center. They have, this is another forecast turbulence. Again, the darker the color, the worse the turbulence is forecast to be during that time frame. This was an airline provided forecast here. And so on this product, they can forecast many different things as you look along the bottom. In this case, it looks to be a very turbulent, kind of heavy day. And they'll give you the altitudes here, for example, here in Wyoming, from 30,000 to 38,000. You could have some occasional moderate turbulence during that time frame. This is the TCF. And what this is a quick picture for convective turbulence. So this is the National Weather Service thinks there will be weather, and here's where they think the coverage will be anywhere from 25% to 74%. It's a very quick way for them to draw turbulence out. The FAA uses this often when they wonder if they're going to need to issue reroutes. They use the TCF to determine what kind of route structure they think they may need to operate flights through the national airspace system. This is another forecast forecast thunderstorm depiction here from the National Weather Service. And again, just paints a very quick picture of where the moisture is and then where thunderstorms are there, the southern portion of the country. COSPA. COSPA is another convective tool. Anyone want to take a guess at what COSPA may or may not stand for? It is still around thunderstorms. It is the Consolidated Storm Prediction for Aviation. It is a web-based application developed by MIT and still maintained by MIT. And what it does is it forecasts thunderstorms in a little bit different of a way than the National Weather Service does. So let's take a look at a couple of screenshots. Here has some weather, again, along the Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas area. The top left corner, you'll see an orange circle there. There's a G like golf in that square. And in the blue square is a D for like delta. Those are depicting decreasing or growing trends within the thunderstorm cells. So towards the back half of this weather here, you can see a little bit of blue there, and that's indicating that portion is decreasing. However, if you kind of look kind of in the center of it, that's all increasing. COSPA is also very good about showing you the tops of these cells. So kind of right here, you have a top here registering at 49,000 feet, 46,000 feet, 42,000 feet. So you have some pretty strong thunderstorms coming through that area. COSPA works either in a 2-hour or 8-hour forecast window. So this right now we're looking at a 2-hour forecast window. And this is the forecast 45 minutes later. Now you may be wondering, why would you only want to look 45 minutes into the future? One reason may be is if you see where the weather was sitting basically on the Texas border, you may have a flight, let's say leaving the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or the Houston area, or the New Orleans area. And you may just want to have an idea of how those storm cells are going to develop if you had a flight that was going to be departing shortly, and to be able to point your crews potentially in the right direction. The next slide is going to be an 8-hour forecast, and it's going to be from a few weeks ago, and it will run automatically here when I go to it. And just watch and see how it operates on an 8-hour scale here. So, of course, Kansas City is right here for us. And so just a few weeks ago, just to the southwest, you had some cells coming through Kansas, and you had some tops registering there, 59, 58,000 feet. Very strong storms that rolled through Kansas that night. If you look up to the northeast, first top you see there, 61,000 feet. So again, some very strong storms that came through. Moving over to some other weather products that we're looking at. This is an infrared satellite picture from the National Weather Service. And then we have a Doppler radar. Again, those are just depicting the moisture. The darker the colors into the yellows kind of indicates the more intensity of that precipitation. But again, just drawing some pictures here. VAC. The VAC is the Volcanic Ash Advisory Center. There are 9 of them around the world. And their sole responsibility is to let us know when there are volcanoes going off. So the Washington VAC on this day was keeping an eye on one of my favorite volcanoes, Popo. I don't know how to say the whole name. I won't try to say the whole name. And so we're just going to call it Popo. Popo is located about 45 miles south of the Mexico City airport. It's one of the most active volcanoes in the world. I can't tell you the last time I did not see an ash advisory or a VAC statement about Popo. On this day, it had a pretty big eruption. For an airport that's fairly close, for a volcano that's very close to an airport, it really only affects the airport 2, maybe 3 times a year, because the ash actually make it to Mexico City and then cause a disruption to the airport. So the VAC will put out a text statement and then put out a picture statement. I like pictures, so this is what that looked like. So you can see the summit is here, and those are lat-long lines. And you can kind of see, and the VAC will tell you, volcanic ash is from the surface to flight level 220 or 22,000 feet. And so if you're planning to flight through that area, or maybe you're landing at Mexico City itself, this is something that you wanted to take into consideration as you go through your planning process. It was like this day, it was a pretty big eruption. The ash made it pretty far away from the summit, and then it looks like as things started to calm down, and then there was a little bit of a wind shift pushing it further off to the east on this day. We're taking up to the upper level winds. This year was an airline provided forecast there of some upper level winds. The magenta there is the jet stream. So on this day, you can kind of see it came down the Pacific coast through northern Mexico, then back up through Texas, and on out to the west coast and across the Atlantic Ocean. The Aviation Weather Center also has one. You can see it's fairly similar. It looks like the Aviation Weather Center may have had the jet stream pushing a little further north, but again, just something to take into consideration. So now you've looked over all your weather, and now you've gotten to the actual release portion. And so again, we're back to considering runways, conditions, fuel, just like we talked about in our JFK example. If we're riding with JFK in those hours where we see those overages, maybe you want to add a little additional fuel, more than what the FARs say is required for Part 121 operations. Payload, of course, if you're in the passenger carrying business, you want to make sure you're able to carry all the passengers, all their bags. And if your airline sells cargo, you want to make sure you can carry some cargo too. And again, any alternate airports that you may need to make sure that you're in compliance with the FARs there. So when you go selecting your route, again, we're looking at a Los Angeles to Boston flight. The FAA has, between a number of city pairs, it's not all of them, has a number of preferred routes they'd like airlines to file. So, in this case, you have some preferred routes that take you a little further south to the middle of the country, kind of through Ohio, and then basically out to the DMV area, and then up into Boston. You have some other routes that go way north, through Rapid City, through Minnesota, the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, through Canada, and then into Boston. So you have some options there. Now, you're not necessarily held to these if there's no actual reroute that's published like we saw earlier. You can sometimes have a little bit of autonomy to be able to plan however you see fit. Let's talk about flight planning systems. So a flight planning system that an airline has is built off the best economics for the airline. It usually has two goals: to get from point A to point B in the fastest amount of time using the least amount of fuel. So sometimes you end up, on your initial run when you open up a flight plan, you may end up seeing something like this. And that's because it's just following, again, those basic rules. Get from point A to point B, fastest amount of time, least amount of fuel. But you can see it's planning itself through some thunderstorms here, and this is where the dispatcher comes in. We don't want to plan through thunderstorms, so you may look at a route after you do all your evaluation that we just discussed. You may see a route and it may come out something like this, and something where you can avoid the weather in that case. So now you've released your flight, you looked at everything, you've released your flight, your job's not done. At this point now, you're monitoring everything we just talked about. You're still continuing to monitor all of those things. Conditions can change, ATC can do what they want. You just have to be ready for anything and everything as you go about your shift. Which leads us to some challenges that we can face on a day-to-day basis. So forecast accuracy. So let's take a step out of aviation for a moment. Let's say you have an off day and you're watching the local news while you're getting ready to start your day. You have a meteorologist that says it's going to be a great day outside. Grab your sunglasses, put the raincoat away, put the umbrella away, you won't need any of that. They're the professionals. You listen to them. So you do that. Maybe you go for a walk, take the dog, significant other, go for a walk, you do whatever. You go enjoy their day. While you're out, sky starts getting a little dark, you start hearing faint rumbles of thunder, and then all of a sudden it starts pouring rain on you, unexpectedly. Aviation is no different. Sometimes forecasts are wrong, and it's up to you to be able to handle that when those situations present themselves, and they will eventually present themselves. Another, and that could lead to, if you have something that pops up en route, having the ability to offer some reroute options to your flights while they're traveling across the country. And I can also talk about terminal impacts. What I mean by terminal impacts is if you have an unforecast thunderstorm that pops up over an airport, your destination airport, let's say, and let's say you work for a carrier that runs a hub and spoke kind of network plan. And so this thunderstorm develops unforecast over your destination airport, which is a hub airport for your air carrier, and there's 50 flights coming in at the same time. No one was planning for thunderstorms. So then you start having to take into account, and it will take some coordination with your colleagues. So if we get into a large diversion event, we're not putting 50 airplanes in one airport because none of us were prepared accordingly. These are just things that could become challenges, things that that can happen. And again, it's just up to you to be able to manage through that situation. Turbulence is no different. Turbulence forecasts can be wrong, can be right. Again, maintaining vigilance and situational awareness and keeping up with those PIREPs like we saw earlier in the presentation and seeing how those are and evaluating them. And what I mean by evaluating them is if you see a severe turbulence report from a Cessna 172, it might be a little different than an A330 going through that same area. So you have to evaluate those pilot reports, and then of course you pass those on to your crews as you see fit, again, for the safety of flight. Runway conditions. Runway condition codes start at number 6 for a dry surface. It goes down to 0 for no traction at all on the surface. Kansas City, actually, and it was either this past winter or the winter before, had a large ice storm that came through here. And there was 0 traction on any surface on the airport. The airport essentially was closed for a day or two because the field conditions were not suitable for airline operations, really for any operations. So those are things that we have to keep up with. Fuel conditions are often advertised via NOTAM. So again, going back to keeping up with NOTAMs and any changes of that sort is where you would find that. Aircraft performance calculations. So temperature, wind, pressure settings, all of those can affect aircraft performance, as will airport elevation. I mentioned high and hot airports a little bit ago. Anyone want to take some guess at some high and hot airports we have in the United States? Denver, Salt Lake City, Reno, Albuquerque, Phoenix, Billings, Las Vegas, I think I just heard. Places like that. So when it's this time of year, and I'll use Vegas as an example, and it's 115 degrees in Vegas, you could lead to some very payload restricted flights. And so then you plan that flight to the best of your ability, and if you're not able to carry anyone, then you have to expand your team to include your airport customer service folks so they can prepare to do whatever they need to do to make sure that airplane leaves safely. National Weather Service versus private forecasts. If you notice while we went through the weather stuff, there were a couple times where I showed you the Aviation Weather Center, the National Weather Service, and I talked about airline provided things. I did that purposely because oftentimes airline meteorologists are able to forecast similar things, and sometimes those forecasts are different. And if they are different, it's up to you, the dispatcher, to do a little more research. Why are they different? What is one meteorologist seeing that the other isn't, or vice versa? And be able to make the best aeronautical decision for your flight. Maximizing efficiency, again, we just talked about how the flight planning systems are designed, and so you have to make sure you're evaluating all of the necessary items as you go through your flight planning process. And then again, uncertainty with how ATC will react, just like that example with JFK, we don't know how they'll react. So sometimes fuel becomes your friend when you can carry it, so you can react to whatever they decide to do. Pilot dispatcher communication. So we can communicate with our flights, or say our captains, a number of different ways. The easiest way is everyone's walking around with a cell phone, right? So if they're still on the ground, they can just call you. Your number to your desk will be on your flight release. VHF radio, it's just the standard radio that's installed on general aviation and commercial airplanes alike. So that's a way that they can contact you potentially. HF radio, or high frequency radio, is it's been around a long time, I'll say, about HF radios. And if you've ever listened to an HF radio call, it kind of sounds like you're talking through a tin can in a stream. So it's not the most, it's a form of communication, but it's not the most reliable form, right? And it can also be affected by space weather. So if you are flying internationally, and you're flying kind of near the North Pole, and there's a space weather event that's happening, it could potentially knock out HF communications. Which leads me to SATCOM, or satellite communications. That's becoming a fairly common way of communications. Essentially, it's a satellite phone that's installed in the airplane. And so you're able to, the pilots are able to use that to dial out to you to be able to get help for whatever they may need. And everyone's favorite, ACARS, the Aircraft Communications and Reporting System. In short, ACARS communication is just texting. And the next slide will show what an ACARS looks like in an airplane. So you can see, it's a fairly small screen, right? And the keyboard is in alphabetical order. It's not it's not a QWERTY keyboard. And also, there's not a backspace button. There's a clear button. So if you make a typo, you have to type pretty slow from the pilot side. But this is a very common, and I'd probably say the most common form of communication that dispatchers and crews use when they're in the airplane is going to be ACARS. So after hearing all that, and you think this might be a job that you may be interested in, how do you get to it? So first and foremost, you have to be 23 years of age to exercise your certificate. And there's an asterisk there. And the reason there's an asterisk there is because after you turn 21, you can go through everything we're about to outline here. What will happen is, if you go through everything and you take your practical test, and you pass it, your examiner then hands you a letter and says, congratulations, you've completed everything to operate as an aircraft dispatcher. When you turn 23, you go to your local FSDO office, and then you can get your certificate. And then you can start using that certificate. So to get through all that, you got to have a high school diploma. You got to be able to communicate in English. Minimum 200 hours of instruction in the classroom setting. And you're going to have to pass an FAA aircraft dispatcher written test, also known as the ADX. Fun fact, the ADX and the ATP, the airline transport pilot written test, share a question bank. So when you start thinking about how dispatchers and pilots, captains specifically, are kind of intertwined, there's a few different ways there behind the scenes where that intertwinement happens. So that 200 hours of instruction in a classroom really covers basically everything we've been talking about here. Meteorology, human factors, aeronautical decision making, navigation, FARs, systems, and a few other things that aren't listed there. So you have to pass both your written and the practical. Your practical will will include manually planning a flight. I can tell you with some certainty, that will probably be the only time you ever have to manually plan a flight. And the education is done at a Part 65 school. So there are some specific dispatch schools throughout the country. And then there are some colleges and universities that offer it as part of their 4-year degree program. So, just want to take the last few moments just to talk about ADF. Who is ADF and what do we do? So ADF is an all-volunteer organization, and we're here to advocate on behalf of the aircraft dispatcher. When you think about how many flights are in the air at one time, remember we talked about earlier, 25 to 35 flights on a domestic desk. Let's just say the round number is 30. So you have one dispatcher for 30 flights. That's one dispatcher for 60 pilots. And that's one dispatcher for 120 flight attendants, assuming you need 4 flight attendants per flight, just on an average basis here. So when you think about just number-wise, there's a lot less dispatchers than there are your front-facing crew members, but we still play a very important role in everything that happens to make sure a flight gets from point A to point B safely. Our membership is made up of active and retired dispatchers from all across dispatch ranks. Some are in the passenger airline business, some are in the cargo airline business. The job is still the same. So we want to make sure that we're advocating on behalf of everyone. And so oftentimes here in the United States, this was a picture of just a random day and passenger airlines that were in the air across the United States at this time. And oftentimes when people are traveling, they're doing so under the watchful eye of an ADF member. So the things that we actually do, we're regularly attending FAA rulemaking committee meetings, again, just to make sure that the dispatcher has a voice, and whatever proposed changes may be happening throughout the industry. We're promoting the dispatcher profession, and we're partnering with different schools to offer scholarships to those who may be interested in getting their dispatch certificate. We award those scholarships at our annual summit, which in this year is going to be in October, and it's typically in the fall. This year will be October 14th to 16th in the Orlando area, and we'll award those scholarships at that time. Through those summits, we tailor the presentations to dispatcher-specific information. And so we have the FAA come in, do a presentation. We'll have some of the carriers come in and do a presentation, and things of that sort, tailored directly to the aircraft dispatcher. Our website here is www.dispatcher.org. It's where you can find information for our website. We are also on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, X, not Twitter. Instagram, TikTok. We're on all of our social media, so please follow us there if you so choose. Again, my name is Micou. I'm the president of ADF. Ryan Makings and Greg Dubin are also part of the board of directors. Mike Tempe, you might have talked with him if you stopped by our table earlier today. He is our treasurer. He's with us today. So thanks for your attention. I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Jared, could you go back to the FARs you started with?
Yeah.
Having heard all this, I want to see them again.
Yep, absolutely. This.
C looks like it's really the core of what drives the dispatcher's function. Am I correct?
I'd agree with that.
And it doesn't start with monitoring the progress. That's number 2, and yet it seems that number 2 is really the beginning of the sequence of responsibilities.
Well, I would say it starts with letter B, where it talks about the pilot in command and the aircraft dispatcher, and it talks about being responsible for the pre-flight planning and delaying or the dispatch release.
Oh, okay, that's joint responsibility.
Correct.
And then, okay, then it branches into dispatcher-only responsibility.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then so far, okay, okay, great. I'd like to see the slide later on. I don't want to
Sure.
hold people up.
No problem. Any other questions? Yes.
I came up with a couple of my slides, so you may have gone over this, but where do you sit? Are you at the airport, or are you at the airline, or where are you in the US?
So we are at the, each airline has an operational center at their headquarters. And so we're in a room of some sort at the airline's headquarters. Some are not necessarily at the airport, but maybe just off the airport. Some are in a downtown facility, potentially. It just depends on where the airline has their headquarters at, but that's where we would be located at.
But you don't work for them, you're in there separate, you're not an employee of the airline?
Yes, no, you are an employee of the airline. Yep. So you're an employee of the airline, and you are only dispatching those airlines' flights. Haley?
During the period like when COVID was at its worst, could your work be done remotely from home, or did everybody still have to go to the work location? I know there were fewer flights then, but still. I mean,
No, but, so here's what I'll say. The FAA allowed carriers to develop a plan to be able to work remotely. For the most part throughout the industry, dispatchers continued to go into their offices, and the airlines had whatever safety practices they needed to comply with within the office. In my office, for example, we continue to go into the office, but some of the non-dispatch functions that are in our office may have been working remotely. So it was possible, but what I will tell you is that it's not ideal. Working in an operations center is where this job should be done, and I think working remotely is a disservice to the product that you can provide itself.
And the reason for that, now add on to what Jared is saying, is the community. So if you're sitting at a desk and you've got 2 or 3 other dispatchers around, and you have something going on, you're working a deal with a flight that's having a problem, they're picking up your slack because your phone's ringing continuously. You're talking to the pilot, but the airport's calling you saying, hey, why isn't this flight here? Or hey, when is that flight going to depart? Or another flight's saying, hey, where is my dispatch release? I need more fuel. So we all kind of work together and help each other out and handle anything that comes up, which is hard to do from home.
What are you looking at? Is there like a screen with a virtual view of the airport, or
Go back to that monitor page you had.
This one?
Yeah.
So just want to confirm the question. So you mean like as flights are moving?
yeah, like what are you looking at your desk?
So if when you use Allison's setup here, so in the middle here, it is her map where all her flights that she's responsible for on her desk would pop up as they are leaving. All right, now as they're departing and as they're flying across the country. Now that's very customizable. She's working a section of the country, but she could zoom into an airport if she wanted to see, and at mostly the bigger airports, if she wanted to see the taxi diagram, the live taxi diagram at, let's say, Los Angeles, then she could zoom into Los Angeles and see where her flights are on the airport surface. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Who makes the call, when you were showing your radar screens with the thunderstorm,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's say a really bad thunderstorm starts, and who makes the call that all the planes have to get diverted, and then you guys then step in and divert everybody, or do you make the call to divert everybody and then you do that?
So that's a decision that's ultimately made jointly by the dispatcher and the captain. And so it just depends on the situation. You know, do we not have the fuel to hold for not that long? Do we think the airport's going to be flooded by the time the thunderstorm moves off the airport? It's a little bit of a gray area. Ultimately, the dispatcher and the captain are the ones deciding if we're going to divert or not and where we're going to divert to. If that answers your question
Or
directly.
does the weather service first make the call and say, hey, all aircraft now have to stay out of this area because there's a really bad,
Nope.
microburst, blah, 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 and y'all gotta go and figure it out?
Nope, that's.
Stay away from this area.
We would get those alerts from the National Weather Service, so they will alert, and there's some automation alerts for microbursts, for example, or wind shear alerts. But the final decision on anything with the flight lies with just the captain and the dispatcher, and whatever those two individuals think is best for safety of flight.
So I'm thinking of like that Delta L tunnel out of Dallas, like
Mhm.
25 years ago, they hit that microburst.
Mhm.
Was somebody supposed to have made the call, or was that just the captain's call and
Uh,
unfortunately it didn't work out?
That situation, as I understand it, is kind of what led to a lot of the automation that we have now for microburst alerts. It seems like prior to that unfortunate incident, there was not a lot of training done on both the pilot, air traffic control, or the dispatcher side as far as microbursts and how they affected flight. So I don't know that there was anything per se that someone did or didn't do. I think at that point there was just a lot of true ignorance to how microbursts could affect flying.
So what made you want to do this job?
That's a great question. So I'll be honest. I worked in. I started my career in Detroit in airport operations, and so I taught with dispatchers, but I never really knew what a dispatcher did. And I had a coworker who just so happened to be going to get his dispatcher certificate, and so he stopped me one day and he said, "Hey, I think you would really like this." And it was at that point I was like, I know I taught the dispatchers, I have no idea what it is that they do. So I made some appointments to get with the dispatchers at our airline, and went down and shadowed them a few different times. And one time I was actually in the middle of a summer thunderstorm event, and I realized this was something that I knew I would enjoy. And so then I went and got my dispatcher certificate, and here I am today. Any other questions? Great, well, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate your help. We have the brochure.